There we go. I'd like to welcome everybody to today's Mondays with MIKI. There for a while, we were meeting on a regular basis every month, but now since everybody's schedule's gotten super busy and things seem to be opening back up, at least in the great state of Kentucky, we didn't want you all to feel pressured that we've got too much going on and you don't want to miss good stuff. So we're happy that you joined us today, and today is definitely good stuff. I'm a little biased, prejudiced, or whatever word you want to use. But today we are very, very fortunate to have Dave Adkisson as our presenter. He's going to be talking about this book. Of course, I have my own, excuse me, autograph copy. So I guess that means I'm somebody. Anyway, Dave, I was very fortunate to have Dave as a boss at the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce, where I've worked for 5 years. Prior to that, Dave was a mentor of mine, whether he knew it or not. I've been in the local chamber world for 15 years, and Dave was always a go-to person for me from the very beginning when I was a part-time director at the Garrett County Chamber of Commerce in Lancaster, Kentucky. He even came down my first year as a chamber executive and spoke at our annual dinner. And boy, I was something then, because everybody couldn't believe that I got the president of the state chamber to come to sweet little Garrett County, Kentucky. Since then, Dave has always been a resource for me. I know he's been a resource for many of you all. He started out in wonderful Owensboro, Kentucky. He can tell you a little bit about his history, but it's running for elections, a mayor, a local chamber, a bigger chamber in Alabama. He's done a little bit of everything, traveled the world, served on boards at the national level. So I'll just let him talk about that too, along with the book. So if you all have questions for Dave, which I hope you do, please put it in the chat box. I will be monitoring that throughout our conversation. We are also recording this, as always. And if you would like a link to see it again or to share with friends or colleagues, you can send me an email at acloud@kychamber.com. I'll put that in the chat box as well. So I'm going to turn off my screen and mute myself and let Dave have the show. So Dave, it's all yours.
Well, thanks, Amy. Thanks for the kind comments. I miss working with you on a day-to-day basis, but the first year and a half of retirement have been very nice on my end, and I hope, I know the Kentucky Chamber is doing well. I hear great things. I see that Shelley Williams from Indiana is on the line there. Shelley and I've been emailing back and forth because she's invited me up to Indiana to present at their conference in about a month. So I'm looking forward to being up there with our friends in Indiana. Let me try here, and Amy described me as her mentor. Actually, she's my mentor when it comes to technology. So let me see if I can screen share and pull up my slides here without causing too much of a problem. Let's see here. All right. And there's the PowerPoint slideshow from the beginning.
Yep.
And I think I have to adjust where you see the one slide and not the presenter's view. So let me do that. And how's that?
That looks awesome. Perfect.
Okay, great.
Go.
So I'll tell you a little bit about this, and then we'll open it up for questions. So be thinking about your questions. We can either do that through the chat box. Amy, I guess you could moderate that when it comes time. I've been asked what caused me to write this book, and it really goes back 8 or 10 years ago when Chris Meade in Washington with ACCE said, Dave, I'm not sure I know anybody that's been at a small city chamber, a metropolitan chamber, in my case was Birmingham, and a state chamber. Why don't you put that on paper? And so I started scribbling a few things down, working on it occasionally, writing something on weekends, patching it together, but really didn't have time. As you know, chamber life is very consuming, and didn't have the time to give it until retirement. And then I decided I either needed to do this or quit talking about it. So I finished it up, and we launched on Amazon back in January. Had a wonderful editor who knows chambers of commerce and knows me and my style. And so that all came together with a publisher in California, and we put it up on Amazon with a very successful launch back in January. Let me first tell you what it is not. It is not a memoir. It is not, certainly not an autobiography. It's not a, certainly not a textbook, but I soon discovered as I did some research that no one had really put the chamber profession on paper. In other words, what's it like to work at a Chamber of Commerce and be a Chamber of Commerce professional? So I decided to approach it from that angle. It's sort of a letter to my younger self. Um, it's it's things that I wish I had known when I was starting out. So you'll notice that the subtitle on here is a practical guide for Chamber of Commerce leaders. But for today's discussion, I thought I would change that to lessons I wish I had known. Things that I would tell myself if I were if I were starting over the way I did some years ago. People have asked me about the title, Horseshoes versus Chess, and that goes back to a meeting of our state chamber association in Kentucky. I can't remember where we were meeting, but we were having our association dinner, annual dinner, and the after dinner speaker was the president of the Louisville Chamber. He also happened to be the chairman of the board of ACCE that year, Mr. Charles Hurd. He passed away about 5 years ago, very distinguished gentleman. And he told the story. He said, you know, a lot of people think that running a chamber of commerce and growing a community is like showing up at a family picnic. Somebody's got some horseshoes. They invite you to toss one. If you get close, you get a point. If you get a ringer, you get 3 points. And that's the game. Not a lot of rules. That's the game. He said that in reality, running a chamber is more complex, and certainly growing your community is more complex than that. It takes intelligence, it takes forethought, in other words, thinking about your moves, one sequence, a sequence of moves from A to B to C, thinking through 2 or 3 moves at one time as to where you're headed and how your opponent is reacting. He even took the analogy a step further. He imagined one of those pieces, you know, in chess, each piece has kind of a different role it plays, different moves it can take. He said, imagine one is transportation, one is economic development, one is the arts, one is education, one is healthcare. And they don't move all at the same time. You don't make big moves all at the same time. You have to sequence them, and you have to do it strategically so you know when to make a move in a particular area. And he said that running a chamber, it's more like chess. It's not horseshoes, it's more like chess. The book has really 4 parts, and I'll just briefly mention what they are to give you a feel for it if you haven't seen the book yet. First is you as a chamber leader. I talk about the personalities of chamber leaders and a survey that was done 10 or 15 years ago by ACCE, where they surveyed 300 chamber execs with a personality profile. Talk about the skill sets and that sort of thing needed to run a chamber. Second part's about you and your chamber. What's it like to work with a board? What's it like to have a new boss every year with your board chairman? Think about that. That's terribly unique. I mean, sure, the person at the United Way has a board of directors and the person at the hospital has a board of directors, but I bet they're in 1% of the working public today that reports to a group of people. They usually have a boss or they work for themselves. So it's a very, very small number of us who report to a group of people, and there's a certain dynamic that has to be in play to make that successful. Third part's you and your community, how a chamber can help shape a community and how a chamber professional can be a key part of helping shape a community. And then a third part, you and your career, talking about how do you develop a career, if indeed that's a chosen career in chamber work, how do you develop that? I pose the question, is your job at the chamber a job that you happen to get and it's a paycheck, that's fine? Or is it a stepping stone? You want to do that so then you can get into insurance or banking or something where your contacts within the chamber help leverage a career in some other segment? Is it a career where you think about serving long-term as a career choice at your chamber or at multiple chambers? Or fourth, is it even higher than that as a calling? Is it your calling in life that it fits you so well that you make it your reason to get up in the morning, to express yourself through the progress of a chamber of commerce? Those are the 4 parts that I outlined in the book. In the first part, when I talk about personalities and all, you know, you have all sorts of different personalities in chamber work. There's not one type of personality that makes you successful. But I mentioned in that there are some common traits that come to the surface, and people with extreme personalities sometimes can be unsuccessful in a chamber position because they're overwhelmed by it. You have introverts and extroverts. I think that's what this graphic kind of explains. You have introverts and extroverts. They can be successful in a chamber in a certain way. But the real trick with chamber leadership is that you're expected to serve your board, your membership, your community, because after all, your board signs your paycheck, so you're working for them. You are subservient to them. But at the same time, as you grow in your position, you're expected to lead. And that's the challenge of chamber work, is both serving, sometimes taking a supportive role, taking the back seat, playing second fiddle, versus being expected to lead and stand out front at a news conference or at the podium at the annual meeting or whatever. And that takes some finesse to do that successfully. I suggest in the book that the most valuable skill that a chamber exec can have is good judgment. And that's true of other professions, whether it's banking or running a hospital or whatever. People are generally promoted. Well, they're usually hired because of a track record of using good judgment in their career. They're promoted, they're rewarded, they're maybe given bonuses, and they're offered other jobs because they have a track record of good judgment. And that's very involved. Good judgment involves everything from big strategic decisions to down to the mundane day-to-day decisions that you make, dozens of them a day, and how you talk to people on the phone, how you greet somebody at the mall, how you stand before an audience, and that sort of thing. In the book, I offer what I call Dave's 80-95 rule. And by that, I mean that if you operate by yourself, just kind of to yourself, and let's say you're really good at your chamber role, really good, you might make, say, 80% good decisions every day, from the pivotal, big strategic decisions, like should we move our headquarters, to the little decisions like how should I coach an employee to do a better job at the front desk, something like that. So let's say you're really good at 80%. If you collaborate with others, either your senior team or your top 3 officers, or a couple of your officers plus your spouse or significant other, you have people that want the best from you, and you trust them and you can run things by them. Amy, you recall our staff meetings. I often, matter of fact, always ran bigger decisions by my senior team, got them involved, and they helped me shave off the rough edges of maybe a half idea that I had before we went to the board with it or whatever. So with collaboration, you can get to a 95% success rate. Obviously, I'm just picking numbers there, but the point is that even if you're really good, by working with others, you can be better. One of the problems, one of the temptations of a chamber is that we take on a lot of activities and we become what some people have called a mile wide and an inch deep. And how do you avoid getting involved in all those things and being a mile wide and an inch deep, and letting your mission creep on you to where you take on the latest project that your board chairman wants you to pursue, that sort of thing? I think it's very important to define the vision of what you want your chamber to be, and do that with your board, or at least your executive committee. Have a serious discussion about what do we want to be in this community. Do we want to be a thought leader? Do we want to be a convener? Do we want to be the voice of business? All of the above. That takes some work. Or do they want to just be a cheerleader for the community? All that discussion is very important. And from that, you can craft your mission. Here are the functions that we're going to perform in this community, and we're going to be really good at it. And what are your values? In other words, how do you carry yourself in the community? Are you nonpartisan? Are you open to new ideas? Are you collaborative with other organizations, with other people, and that sort of thing? That kind of discussion, I think, is probably the most important discussion a board of directors and the executive can have to make sure their chamber doesn't veer all over the place, and go in a lot of different directions without a firm sense of direction. Alongside that vision, mission, and values, from those you can then create a strategic plan. At our chambers, we typically thought in terms of a 3-year trajectory. In other words, what do we want to accomplish in the next 3 years? Perhaps it's we need a new high school in the community, or we need a new exit off the interstate, or we need to make sure we keep our military base in the region, or we need a new chamber headquarters. Those types of things in a 3-year plan, and then you can be more specific with a 1-year business plan. That's where at our chambers, we would say, okay, based on our strategic plan for the next 3 years, here's what we think we can accomplish in the next year, or here's what we think we ought to try to accomplish in the next year. And it got pretty specific. It would be more of an operational plan. In other words, we need to decide whether or not we're going to sign another lease on this building that we're renting, or go out and try to build one, or rent someplace else. Very specific kind of operational things go into the business plan. Or we need to shift our annual meeting from January to May. Those types of things in a more specific business plan. You know, there's a phrase in chamber world called pancakes and parades versus public policy. I don't know if you've heard that before, but let me kind of give my interpretation of that. Chamber sometimes, in taking on all these activities that the community wants us to take on, sometimes we find ourselves just sponsoring more pancake sales to earn money for the chamber in order to sponsor another parade or festival or activity or beauty contest or whatever. And we get wrapped up in those activities without stepping back from that and saying, what's our best and most important, most valuable role that we can play in our community? And by public policy, I don't mean just governmental affairs. I mean, that's great to have a governmental affairs program at your chamber, but it's more than just going to City Hall and say, by the way, here's what businesses feel, or by the way, council members, here's what the business community would like to see. It's more than that. It's helping bring ideas to the community. It's helping establish a vision for the community, and trying to keep the community looking forward toward progress. There's a section in the book on developing your board. You know, every nonprofit that I've ever heard of wants to have a more prestigious board, a more powerful board, a more moneyed board. In other words, people who can tap resources from their companies, from their families, from the local community foundation or whatever, people who can bring resources to your chamber. Well, how do you develop a board? I suggest that first you have to earn their respect. Use their time wisely. I once went to a board meeting of a nonprofit group. The meeting was supposed to be 2.5 hours long. I had told the exec that unfortunately I could only stay for the first hour and a half. And someone was running late for the meeting. And so during the box lunch, which was the start of the meeting, instead of moving on with the agenda, they said, well, let's just wait until Shirley gets here and we'll get started. So for 20 minutes or so, we simply had small talk. Well, that was enjoyable, but if you're expecting to build your board and get the top people from your community on your board, they're probably going to scratch their head and say, wait, is this the best use of my time? The local community college wants me on their board, or the hospital wants me on that board, or the Red Cross wants me on that board. You know, do I choose to be involved with the chamber if my time is not respected? And I know it's not always
Oh, goodness. We look like Dave has frozen up. You guys hang tight for just a second. Dave, can you hear us? All right, you guys give me just a minute and we will get Dave back. Hang tight. All right, we're going to get Dave back on here in just a minute. Everybody just hang tight, please. Technology is wonderful until it's not. So give me just a minute.
Growing our chamber means growing resources, and we usually think of dues. Clearly, that's the traditional way in which chambers have kept the doors open, by dues. And that goes back a few hundred years. Pay dues, belong, join, that general membership model. But I suggest in the book, one cannot live by dues alone. Let me see if I can.
Hey,
There we
Dave, we lost you for a second. And so
Okay.
your PowerPoint, you just came back in and your PowerPoint stopped. So can you share the screen again? I was just saying technology is.
I'm sorry, we broke up
isn't
there. Yeah, yeah. Can you see the chart with the coins?
No, I can't see. You're not sharing your screen right now. Try to do it again like you were
Oh.
doing it from the beginning.
Oh, okay. All right. Sorry. Let's go back to the Zoom and see if I can share.
And you
Well,
should be able to select current slide.
yeah, yeah. Well, let's.
Ah, I think he froze again.
Not working so well.
Your
Are
face
you
is
still there,
frozen,
Amy?
so I know you're doing something on the computer, but you're frozen on our screen.
I might have to call back in.
There, we got you now. Maybe it's
I'm
just a
so
matter of the PowerPoint trying to do that at the same time. I don't know.
let me try to bring up the PowerPoint. Can you see the coins now?
We cannot.
Oh boy. Okay, I apologize. I don't know what happened. And you can't see me now?
Yeah, we can see you now. You're perfect. If you just want to chit
Amy?
chat, we don't have to have the PowerPoint. We'd much rather hear you talk if we have to pick one or the other. You keep freezing though.
Yeah, okay. Let me try one more time.
Okay.
Well, thank you. Let me try one more time. Did that bring up a slide?
No, it
Okay,
didn't.
but you can see me?
Yeah, I can see you just fine.
Okay, all right.
And
Well,
even when you froze up, we could hear you. So you just keep going on. We'll interrupt
okay.
when we need you.
I apologize for the glitch. I don't know whether how that's happening.
That's all right.
But so I suggest in the book that one cannot live by dues alone. And we were fortunate at our chamber over the 15 years I was at the Kentucky Chamber that we grew every year in terms of the revenue from dues, but it was usually 2% or 3%. And that was with a strong effort to keep our members and to grow our members. But a nationwide trend is that more and more chambers are actually operating with fewer members, the number of members, but they operate with more revenue because chamber members that have stayed see more value and are willing to invest more. So the bad news is we had lost some members, but the good news was the ones who were with us were more loyal than ever, certainly in terms of their financial support. I suggest that we look at it as a three-legged stool. One leg is dues income. That's what keeps the doors open. One is non-dues income, and that's your annual meeting, that's your seminars, the publications that you might sell, things that generate revenue, activities, seminars, et cetera, that generate revenue for the chamber to broaden its programs. And then last, or the third leg of the stool is what I call fundraising, specifically cause-based fundraising. A cause such as we need to renovate our boardroom, or we need to build a new building, or we're creating a scholarship fund, or we're funding our leadership program. In other words, the fundraising is not just say, hey, send us a check because we're the Chamber of Commerce and we'd like to have more support. It's a matter of putting a cause out there that they can believe in. And that takes time. That takes some coordination of your programs with your fundraising. for, let's say, $200, but they will pay $500 for a table at the annual meeting. They might pay $2,500 to sponsor a tax seminar that they'd like the name of their firm as the presenting sponsor. Or they might write you a check for $25,000 if you're doing something such as creating a scholarship fund that would allow them and get us registered as a foundation. Second, chambers that have a foundation on paper, but it hasn't been used in years. In other words, it's dormant. A foundation that somebody created back in the 80s, and it's there if somebody insists on giving you some money, but it isn't an active part of your chamber. The third type of chamber is a chamber with an active foundation, and you routinely use it to raise money for your leadership program or a scholarship program or things like that, things that are of a charitable nature. The fourth level, which is one I suggest that chambers aspire to, is what I call an intentional foundation. In other words, you intend to use the foundation as that third leg of the stool as part of your ongoing chamber program. And I suggest that while you might be able to grow incrementally with dues increases, you can grow more substantially and more dramatically with fundraising through your foundation. And then I suggest various people and foundations with money overlap with the work of a chamber of commerce. Amy, are you able to hear what I'm saying on that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
We
keep hearing you, even though you freeze up every once in a while, but your voice is coming over fairly loud and clear.
Okay. All right. Well, a few more points, and then we'll kind of open it up for the chat box. I mentioned several things where there is money to be raised, and that chambers are areas that are in the comfortable wheelhouse of a chamber, like education causes, workforce causes.
Seriously, it's a sunny day in Kentucky. I have no idea what's going on. I apologize, you guys. We'll keep working on Dave talking. Dave, I don't know if you can hear me, but you're completely frozen now. While we're getting Dave back in, you all be thinking of questions that you have for him. Please put those in the chat box. It can be to panelists or all panelists and attendees if you want everybody to see what you're asking. But be thinking of questions that you want to chat with Dave about the book or just about his service as well. Not only with a local chamber in Owensboro, a metro chamber in Birmingham, Alabama, or his work with the state chamber with ACCE. We'll make sure and get those questions answered if y'all want to put those in the chat box. All right, Dave, we're back. I don't know what's going on. I'm so sorry.
I wonder, should I try to come back into the call?
You just did. You just came back in.
Oh, okay.
You left us for a minute. Yeah.
Did you hear me talking about the Muhlenberg County example?
No, you start back with that.
Okay. All right. I used it as an example, a community of 23,000 people in Kentucky, small county that had been somewhat devastated by the demise of the coal industry. And this gentleman had grown up there. When his father died in the 60s, he inherited about $250,000, I think. He moved to Florida. He was involved in investing. And then he moved back when his mother was elderly. And when she passed away in the 90s, I think he inherited, unbeknownst to anybody in the community, he inherited about $8 million, a lot of money. Well, he continued with his investing, etc. He was a quiet fellow. He lived in the house he grew up in on Main Street. He went to the Rotary Club, went to the Methodist Church. Unbeknownst to the community, when he passed away a few years ago, his estate was $60 million. And what was really startling was that he left $50 million. At the moment he died, $50 million of his estate transferred to a new foundation he had set up through the Louisville Community Foundation. He wanted it managed outside the local community, just to keep, to avoid conflicts. And $50 million was set aside for the citizens of Muhlenberg County. What's amazing about that is that the mission statement, and it's on the website of the Felix Martin Foundation, it's for the benefit, the civic, educational, and health benefit of the citizens of Muhlenberg County. The mission statement of his foundation read almost like the mission statement of a Chamber of Commerce. And so there's a $50 million pot of money meant to do the things that we all commit our work days, 60-hour weeks to doing. And so that there's incredible private wealth in our communities, not just with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or the Ford Foundation, but in our communities, there's a lot of wealth. And so I get into that a little bit as a real resource for chambers. I also mentioned in the book that what I call the Great Chamber Paradox. And Amy, can you hear me still?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay. All right. I want to check in every once in a while.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
I hate to talk to myself, but I call it the Great Chamber Paradox. And by that, I mean that the more dysfunction there is in a community, the more there's a perception that the governmental and the political powers that be aren't working well for the community, the more of an opportunity there is for a Chamber of Commerce. I'll never forget when I moved to Birmingham and I was interviewing literally about 200 business leaders in the first 100 days I was there. I made it my goal to interview 2 a day for the first 100 days. And it struck me that several said, "Hey, we need you." And I thought, they don't know me. They don't know me enough to need me. What they were saying, they needed a Chamber of Commerce because there was a perception in the community that all the governments in that region, the suburban governments, several counties around Birmingham, and the city hall in Birmingham didn't get along. There was no vision. Everybody was bickering, etc. They needed a Chamber of Commerce. They needed the business community to help sort that out and provide leadership. And so I think as chambers have a real opportunity, especially when there is so much dysfunction. And think about our national situation, and not to get political about this or partisan, but you've got the Donald Trump versus Nancy Pelosi, and everybody takes on sides, and you got cable news that shouts all day. And it seems like our whole society is divided. Our community sometimes can be divided over a planning and zoning issue or an issue about building a new high school. That's where a chamber can sometimes walk through the middle with its facts and figures, its research, and its survey of the business community. Here's what the business community would like to see happen in this community. That can be very, very powerful in a community or a state or a nation that seems to be so divided. Chambers can be an idea port for their community, bringing ideas into the community from other communities. And that's why it's so important for chambers to visit with each other in the meetings like you're having today, in conferences, visiting. I remember when we took 6 from our senior team to the Georgia State Chamber to spend a day with them, just picking their brain about how do you do this? How do you do board meetings? How do you sign up new members? How big is your board? That kind of thing. We shared ideas back and forth, and that is so important. If you can find a chamber that kind of feels like yours and you can visit them, take your board chair, take your top 3 board members and visit with their top 3 board members, it can be an extremely valuable session that you learn from each other. So as I conclude and I talk about the future of the chambers, I suggest number 1, chambers aren't going anywhere. We're going to be around. I've suggested that if you woke up tomorrow and you didn't have a chamber in your community, by the end of the week, some group of business people would be talking to each other at the country club or at Walmart or at church or wherever and say, hey, we really need to organize our business and maybe get a chamber of commerce going here. So chambers are going to be around, but they're going to have to adapt to new realities. Businesses don't join chambers for the reasons that they did 20 and 40 years ago, back when it was a civic duty to join the chamber. Now businesses look for a return on investment. What do I get out of it? Do I get more prominence? Do I have a bigger voice at City Hall? Do I get better seating at the annual meeting? Those types of things. And it's more transactional in that sense. So we have to adapt to that. And the best way to do that is through professional development, like programs like today and things that your state associations can offer and ACCE offers. So I hope that the book that I've offered offers some encouragement about our profession. We have a very, very unique role and an amazing opportunity to use that role to make lives better for our community. And that's what it's all about. Change is accelerating. It's just happening faster and faster and faster. Chamber can help its members and its community navigate that change and try to move like on a chessboard toward greater prosperity. So Amy, with that, if you're still there and I'm still here, maybe have
We're all still here. It seems like we're all still doing what it was like. It's a sunny day in Kentucky. What is going on? But it's technology, and everybody on this call has been there and done that. So Dave, we certainly appreciate that. I'm looking for questions from folks, from our attendees. I did want to ask something and just your thoughts or maybe first steps. There's a lot of talk about diversity and inclusion in the world today.
Right.
that the too many faces look the same in a meeting, in a board meeting, in a committee, and in a group, a company, the government. We used to always joke about PMS, pale, male, and stale, that were on all these chambers. Well, that's changed quite a bit, of course, in the last 30 years. But what about diversity in staff, especially if your staff is very small? It isn't like you have 30 and you can try to start that changeover. What's the best kind of first steps in letting your community feel like the chamber is striving for diversity and inclusion, since that's such a hot topic?
Right. Well, obviously, it's easier to think in terms of diversity when you've got a staff of 30 than a staff of 3. But my philosophy, and I learned a lot from my experience in Birmingham, which was a very, very a positive experience. Diversity there, of course, had racial implications, obviously, because of the history of that community, but also because we were the regional chamber of commerce, diversity meant geographic diversity. In other words, are you reaching out to other parts of the region? So I think a key thing to do is to think about, shouldn't our chamber look like the community? So if you have a very diverse community with an Asian population, African American population, Hispanic, can you bring that in? I found that at the Kentucky Chamber, diversity not only meant gender, it meant ethnicity, it meant generational. Do we have any young people on any entrepreneurs, for example, on our board and on our staff? Do we have geographic diversity? And then you've also got to have diversity of the types of businesses. We had a large board, 75 members on our board. So if you end up with 8 lawyers and only 2 manufacturers, you have to scratch your head and say, wait a minute, we're out of whack here. So I took a lot of information to our nominating committee each year about bases that we needed to touch, whether it might be in Western Kentucky or we needed more from the manufacturing community, or whether, and I would take them statistics on the female ratio of our board, the minority ratio, and that sort of thing. I do think that diversity is more important than ever before. Amy, when I hired, and I'll reveal a little bit about my age, I guess, here, but I hired on in 1976 at my hometown chamber, Owensboro. The board was completely male, mostly older. I would say the average age was over 55. There were a couple of business people in their maybe early 40s, but the average was probably late 50s. And I remember in the 70s, late 70s, it was a deal when the nominating committee chose to bring the first female onto the board. Well, today it's very, very different, as you know, thank goodness. But diversity continues, especially in the times we live in our nation right now. A chamber, I don't think, can afford to be the older white men sitting in a bank boardroom behind closed doors making decisions about the future of the community without engaging other stakeholders.
That's true. That is. And, from a female perspective, thank goodness that isn't what boards look like anymore. But it is, I mean, and it's growing, and I know it takes some time. It's not something that you can change overnight, with your board or with your staff or your membership. But
Right.
it's just nice Kentucky board struggles with it just because we're not a very diverse state as a whole. So I know that people struggle with that, and I know they want to show without tooting their horn that they are trying to be diverse in their decisions and their nominations and growth and so on and so forth. Another question I had was about public policy. We're really focusing on that in Kentucky about helping local chambers, no matter how big or small, grow a public policy um, feel. Not that that's what the chamber needs to be about, but everyone's learning quickly that we understand what happens when our voters are uneducated.
Right.
So trying to understand that public policy is not politics. What are some good suggestions, especially for those smaller communities, on how they can approach this? Or what's the best way to even introduce what public policy might mean for their community? It could be, I mean, I live in a county with 17,000 people. How would you introduce that to this community as how that can be a benefit as opposed to them just seeing politics really big in their face when that's
Right.
not it at all?
Right. One thing we did at our state chamber, of course, state chambers typically are all about public policy and lobbying the legislature and the governor and the courts and that sort of thing. So there's a different culture of state chamber than there is from the local chambers that I have served. But don't equate public policy just with politics. In other words, you don't have to say, well, you mean we're going to try to get involved in the mayor's race or the state representative's race? No, you don't necessarily have to go there at all, but public policy in the sense of helping your community with its agenda. In other words, where are we headed? You might sponsor an open forum or a public debate between candidates. There are a lot of ways that you can stay out of the white hot controversial zone of politics and yet still be involved in helping your community make decisions. Let's say the school board has called for a new high school. It's going to involve a vote on a tax referendum or something, and the chamber becomes kind of the honest broker that offers a forum and offers rents out the well, you wouldn't have to rent the high school gymnasium, but you sponsor the forum as a neutral party for people to present their ideas and that sort of thing. So I encourage chambers of all sizes to look at what they can do and help in terms of helping shape an agenda for their community by bringing the best talent you have from the business community and presenting it to the community and asking for reactions.
Great. I appreciate that. And I know that's a struggle, even in larger chambers. I know that people don't want to be political. We don't want to hurt our membership or our presentation in the community
Right.
because we try to represent all. We're all about the business community, no matter what side of the aisle you're on. But we
Well,
also want to feel like
chambers are very different. I know some state chambers that get involved and make an endorsement in the governor's race. But I remember in our state back a few years ago, if we had endorsed the Republican whose policies lined up very closely with the chamber, but a Democratic incumbent was running, and he had been very friendly to the business community and had engaged the chamber. And if we'd taken a secret vote of our board members, a secret ballot, I bet he would have probably won 3-1. But had we officially endorsed either way, it would have ripped our chamber apart. So I'm not suggesting that everybody needs to go home and get involved in the mayor's race, but being able to be involved in public issues and helping bring those issues to the public in a constructive way can be very, very important for a chamber.
Yeah, and this past year has shown that. I mean, how chambers have almost been the mouthpiece for local government, not for political reasons, but just getting information out when it comes to mandates from the governor, how the local county health departments were handling situations or events. Now that things are reopening, they're looking to the chamber now because for the last 12, 16 months, it's been the chamber that's had the answers. So it could be something like that that folks could capitalize on as well. Now that they've kind of got the ear of the public, that they can focus on stuff that's more maybe in the weeds when it comes to policy or bills or something that may affect the business community. But I appreciate that advice. Who else has some questions? Anybody else? I've just kind of dominated the conversation. Any more questions for Mr. Adkisson? I know we're coming close to the end of our time together, but I want to make sure y'all have ample opportunity. I've told y'all this before at the beginning, and anybody who knows me, when I talk about Dave, I'm very biased. He is a mentor of mine and was my boss. He's still a person I reach out to and say, help, I need some help. I need some advice. I'll show this again. I got a question and all that. I was getting ready to show your book again. Lisa, my counterpart in Illinois, she says, if a chamber had to pick one thing to focus on in the next 5 years, what should it be? One thing.
I would say the top issue that your board decides is the most pressing issue that the chamber can affect. And that might require a weekend retreat or a day-long retreat, or at least an afternoon where you bring in a facilitator, maybe from the community college or wherever, to help facilitate a discussion. What are the key issues facing our community, and where can our chamber make a difference? Let the board decide that, and then that becomes your top priority. I know that's a simplistic way of looking at it, but I wouldn't, as a chamber professional, I wouldn't feel a personal responsibility for naming that vision, naming that priority. I would want the board, for it to be board driven. It's far more effective if you've got your top leader saying, this is what we want to do.
Very good. That's a great answer. It's something good to remember. Your board is the boss at the end of the day.
Well, and there's the old phrase that if they write the plan, they will underwrite the plan. In other words, if they believe in it and they've helped construct it, then they will bring the resources to make it happen. And you've got very strong people on your side as you try to pursue that priority.
That's great. There's buy-in for certain when they know that they've put the words on the page.
Right.
They've written the map that you're following, then they certainly will help you follow it, and they will follow it as well. Desiree asked, what was your biggest lesson learned over your decades of service? Do you have one big one?
That you have to adapt, with a new boss every year. That's a challenge, because you might have one boss that has no desire to be out front, but feels it's his or her civic duty to serve as the chairperson of the board. Mm-hmm. You might have the next chairperson who loves nothing more than being at the podium and giving his or her opinions on everything under the sun. And how do you adapt to that? I'll never forget, I had one board chairman early in my career, a prominent business person in my community, who had such bad stage fright that the day of our annual meeting, which would have had 700 people, I guess, in an arena type setting, he literally checked himself into a hospital to avoid being there at the annual meeting that night. Oh, wow. Now, I'm not accusing him. I mean, I feel sorry in a way. He was effective in many other ways. But your next board member might be somebody who's perfectly comfortable being out front and standing at a news conference and announcing that the chamber's done this or done that, or meeting with the mayor. So you have all these different personalities and adapting to that. And I guess the other thing that I wish, you asked for one thing, and I want to get to. The other thing is about the fundraising piece. I wish I had seen it earlier in my career that serious work by Chamber of Commerce can attract serious dollars. And I use the example of a college president. I happen to serve on the board of my small college in Kentucky, and I was the chairman when we hired a new president. And I'll never forget that the board was far more interested in getting somebody who could raise money than necessarily having the academic credentials of a PhD, which is normally that's the first litmus test, for a college president. But we knew as a small college, facing some headwinds in terms of keeping small colleges going, we had to have somebody with a proven track record in raising money. And so I suggest in the book that chamber executives kind of move toward that type of leadership. In other words, spending a lot of time in fundraising and in what I call friend raising. In other words, developing those relationships with people who can help. And it's not always just going out with your hand out and saying, well, would you write us a check for $5,000? But matching your goals with the resources and then encouraging somebody on your board, maybe the bank president. Would you approach Fred or his bank or the community foundation about a grant to help us bring in the consultant to do this or that? In other words, matching your goals with resources that are out there and the person who can actually make the ask. I mentioned in the book too that I've been told there are the 4 R's of fundraising: having the right person asking at the right time for the right cause at the right amount.
Right.
And that might be, instead of you asking for the check, you say, hey, Fred, you grew up with so-and-so, or you live next door to so-and-so, or you go to church with so-and-so. Would you feel comfortable in suggesting that he step up and be the lead donor for our chamber's new program?
And that could start a snowball effect too. When
Yeah,
other board members see how their colleagues, their volunteer board member colleagues are not only asking, being the one to ask, but asking and receiving funds to help the plan that they're helping write, that whole strategic plan, then that starts a precedence in my mind that that's how you continue. And as a board member coming on new, you see the older board members and what they have done, that can certainly help your bottom line. And you're not always the one asking. Because I
right,
know when I talk with a lot of chamber execs, they say that's not their game. They're not a salesperson. They're not a fundraiser. They feel like they're in it all by themselves. They don't know how to approach their board about doing it, but that's a great idea in order to engage their board to help them with that toughest part.
right.
You can maybe sell membership and get people to events, but you might not be good on those big asks when it comes to matching up your goal with the amount of money. That's a perfect way to get people in the door too, that might want to give money, they just haven't been asked.
That's right.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Who else has a question? Anyone else before we let Dave go? Dave, as always, it's wonderful. I love talking with you. I look up to you. I know folks on this call look up to you as well. We're getting books ordered. Here's if you want to see a picture of the book, here's we're getting copies ordered for our conference. I know that Indiana has, Michigan, a few other states have. If even not, you can order it. It's you can get on Kindle, you can get on Amazon, correct? You can talk to Dave about them as well if you have a group that you want to order them for. If you need to get them for staff or for all your board. It's just a great idea. This whole thing wasn't for him to just say, hey, buy my book. I just want you all to hear from his own mouth what he's putting on paper. You feel like you're chatting with him when you read this book, and that's a great perspective as well, because he's a good person to turn to when you have a question or need some advice. And I turn to the book and look through it and reread it again. I have pages highlighted and earmarked of stuff that I share with our local chamber professionals in Kentucky. And I hope you guys will use this as a resource as you make your way through your chamber career. Like I said before, we've recorded this. So if you'd like to see it again, just send me an email. I'll be happy to share the link with you. Dave, as always, you're wonderful. I appreciate your time. I know you're busy. I love it that you're getting out and speaking to some chambers about this book and about your experiences, because I'm privy to a lot of those stories already, and it's nice that other people get to hear them as well. With that, say hi to Bonnie and the kids for me. And I will let you guys go. You all have a wonderful week. Join us next quarter for another Mondays with MIKI. Be looking for information in the next couple of weeks from your state director on details. Thanks, you guys. Have a good day.
Thank you all very much.